They say a single moment can shatter everything. A sudden silence in the hallway, a door slammed shut, a secret hidden in plain sight. One boy's world collapses overnight, leaving only unanswered questions and a loyal dog staring through the storm. But in the shadows of heartbreak, something impossible is about to unfold. Have you ever witnessed a miracle that defied all explanation? Tell us your most unbelievable story, or let us know what you would do in Ethan's place. Green Valley, Colorado, awoke beneath a sky washed in pale morning gold, the air already humming, with the restless promise of another scorching July day. Summer here carried its own scent, sun-warmed pine needles, distant wood smoke, and the crisp, almost mineral tang that rolled off the mountain peaks. On the edge of town, the Brooks' modest house sat nestled among wild daisies and waist-high grass, its white paint flaking porch steps, creaking with the memory of laughter now long gone. 9-year-old Ethan Brooks was the first awake. He stood at his bedroom window, gaze fixed on the horizon, his small frame silhouetted against the thin lace curtain. He was a slender child, short for his age, with hair the color of burnt wheat and eyes so blue they seemed almost translucent in the morning light. His shoulders hunched in a way that made him seem smaller still, as if he was trying to disappear into his oversized t-shirt, a hand-me-down from his late father. The only thing he clutched was a battered tennis ball, worn soft and smooth from years of play. Ethan hadn't spoken much since March, the month when Green Valley lost one of its own. Mark Brooks, town police officer, father, friend to everyone, died in the line of duty. The town changed that day, but nowhere did the silence settle heavier than inside Ethan's chest. He'd learned to carry grief in silence, to lock words behind his teeth, letting only a few syllables slip out to the one companion who seemed to understand Buddy. Buddy was a golden retriever, broad-shouldered and golden as fresh-cut hay, with gentle brown eyes flecked by years and wisdom. At 9, he moved with the slow grace of an aging athlete, muscular but softened by time, his muzzle faded to silver, his tail swishing with a quiet dignity. Once Buddy had been the pride of the Green Valley K-9 unit. He wore his old blue collar like a medal, its faded tag engraved with Mark Brooks's initials. In the months since Mark's funeral, Buddy had slept at the foot of Ethan's bed every night, a silent guardian whose breath deep and steady seemed to hold the house together. On this particular morning, Buddy rose as Ethan did, stretching out long limbs and yawning with a dog's unhurried satisfaction. He patted over nudged Ethan's knee and looked up, tongue lolling, as if to say, "Are we ready?" Ethan managed the faintest of smiles. He crouched and wrapped his arms around Buddy's neck, burying his face in the thick sun-warmed fur. The two shared a language made of touch and trust, no words required. Downstairs, the sound of clattering dishes meant Julia Brooks was awake. Julia was 36, a woman of gentle beauty and careful gestures, her dark hair always pulled into a loose bun that seemed to unravel by midday. She was tall but walked with a soft, cautious step, as if afraid to disturb the world around her. Years as an ER nurse had given Julia a calm, almost clinical patience, but lately her movements were edged with exhaustion and worry. Since Mark's death, she'd taken on double shifts at the local hospital, her smile growing rarer and her laughter almost vanishing, as if each day stole another piece away. Julia tried in her way to fill the spaces Mark left behind. She cooked breakfast, paid bills, coaxed Ethan to brush his teeth, comforted little Ellie through nightmares. But she was not Mark, and the ache in her heart sometimes made her sharp with the children, or left her staring out the window long after the sun had gone down. Still, she never let Ethan see her cry. Ellie Brooks, only 5, was a contrast to her older brother. She bounded down the stairs every morning, feet bare hair, a tousled halo of chestnut curls. Ellie's cheeks were round and always smudged with syrup or dirt, her eyes a bright, indefatigable green. She was fearless, running through the backyard in her pajamas, daring hornets, hugging Buddy with reckless abandon. In her world, Dad's absence was a puzzle she could not solve. Sometimes she would ask where he was, with the stubborn insistence of the very young, her voice pitched with hope that someone would give her the right answer at last. That morning, Ethan found Julia in the kitchen, standing at the counter with her back to him. The radio played low, the local news talking about the upcoming town festival and the heat wave that wouldn't let up. Julia's figure was thin, almost willowy, but her posture was proud back straight, even as her shoulders drooped with fatigue. She wore her nurse's scrubs, a badge clipped to the collar, and moved with a practiced efficiency that left no motion wasted. She looked over her shoulder and smiled when she saw Ethan, the expression warm but fleeting. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, her voice light for Ellie's sake, but with a tremor only Ethan seemed to notice. Buddy trotted to his water bowl, lapping noisily. Ellie zipped past, giggling, sliding across the kitchen floor in socks. "Buddy wants to play," she sang, grabbing his tail before Ethan gently pulled her back. Julia reached out, brushing Ellie's curls from her face, her touch both tender and distracted. "Pancakes are ready," she announced, setting a plate on the table. But Ethan's appetite, like his words, was missing. They ate mostly in silence. Occasionally Ellie would babble about frogs in the garden, or the mysterious fairy ring she found near the fence. But Julia's mind wandered. She worried about the unpaid bills, about Ethan's silence, about her own hollowed-out reflection in the bathroom mirror. For all her efforts, she felt Mark's absence most keenly in these quiet, ordinary moments. The echo of his laughter at breakfast, the heavy tread of his boots in the hallway, the way he would scoop Ellie up and twirl her until she shrieked with joy. After breakfast, Ethan slipped out the back door, Buddy at his heels. The yard was wild and sprawling, ringed by an old cedar fence, the grass tall enough to hide a child. A battered swing set stood under the lone cottonwood, its chains squeaking in the breeze. Ethan knelt in the grass, rubbing Buddy's ears, watching as a pair of magpies squabbled over breadcrumbs near the shed. He felt the old ache, a mixture of longing and anger, settle over him like a familiar blanket. He missed his father most in the summer. Mark had taught him to fish in the creek, to build forts out of branches, and dreams to run through the fields, with nothing but the wind and a loyal dog at his side. Now those days seemed impossibly far away. Ethan picked up a stick and tossed it. Buddy chased it, bounding with a flash of old energy returning, with the stick clenched in his jaws and a wag of his tail that seemed to say, "I'm still here. We're still a team." From the porch, Julia watched her stepson with a heavy heart. She wanted to call him back, to hold him, to promise that everything would be all right. But she knew better than to make promises she couldn't keep. Instead, she busied herself with chores, sweeping the porch, watering the window boxes, pausing every so often to glance at the boy and his dog, two shadows lost in a world that seemed to have spun off its axis. As the sun rose higher, the heat settled over Green Valley like a thick blanket. The town's main street, usually sleepy, was coming alive with preparations for the festival, colorful banners fluttering, the scent of kettle corn in the air, and neighbors calling greetings across picket fences. Ethan watched it all from a distance, feeling both part of and apart from it, as if he were floating behind glass. The world moved on, but for the Brooks family, time ticked by in slow, careful increments. Ellie joined Ethan in the yard, her laughter breaking the stillness as she tried to copy his stick-throwing, missing wildly and shrieking when Buddy licked her face. For a moment, Ethan smiled for real, a small crack in the shell that grief had built around his heart. Buddy flopped on the grass beside them, his fur warm and sweet, his eyes watching the children with the quiet devotion only a dog can offer. As afternoon drew near, Julia called the children inside for lemonade. They gathered at the kitchen table, the old ceiling fan humming above sunlight, slanting through the window and painting the floor in golden stripes. For a little while the house felt almost normal, almost safe, a fragile piece held together by the simple presence of family and a dog who had seen too much but never stopped loving. When the day faded to dusk and the first crickets began their song, Ethan lay in bed, Buddy curled beside him. Outside, thunderheads gathered on the mountains, promising rain that might or might not come. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the steady rhythm of Buddy's breathing and the distant laughter of children somewhere out on Main Street. Ethan closed his eyes, holding Buddy close. He whispered into the dog's ear words no one else heard, secrets too heavy for a child to carry alone. In the dark, Buddy listened, his heart beating strong and sure against Ethan's cheek. And though the ache of missing his father would never truly fade for a moment, Ethan felt the comfort of belonging. He was not alone, not entirely. Not while Buddy was there, not while the summer night still held the promise of another dawn. The next morning dawned bright and cloudless, the kind of Colorado blue that seemed to stretch on forever. The air in Green Valley shimmered with summer energy, the usual mountain stillness replaced by a riot of sound car horns, children shrieking with laughter, and the tinny clang of carnival games. By mid-morning, Main Street had been transformed, canvas banners draped from lampposts, stalls lining the sidewalks, and the distant smell of frying dough and grilled corn drifting through the heat. The Brooks family, like everyone else, was drawn to the center of town, where the festival would reach its climax with the annual auction. Julia Brooks looked tired as she shepherded Ethan and Ellie through the crowds. She wore a faded blue sundress, her hair pinned up, but with wisps escaping around her temples, betraying a night of restless sleep. Despite the smile she managed for neighbors, a crease of worry lived between her brows. She held Ellie's hand tightly, the little girl already sticky with cotton candy, bouncing and pointing at everything with wide-eyed delight. Ellie's face was painted with a pink butterfly glitter stuck in her lashes, her laughter carrying above the noise. Ethan trailed a few steps behind, clutching a battered mason jar heavy with coins. His sneakers scuffed at the edge of the curb, and he kept a wary eye on Buddy, who walked close at his side, tail swaying, nose twitching at all the unfamiliar scents. Today Buddy's old blue collar had been polished, his fur brushed, until it shone in the sunlight. Despite his dignified walk, there was a nervous tension in the dog's posture, a sense that even he understood. This day was different. As the family wove through the crowd, a familiar voice called out from behind a booth covered in local newspapers and press passes. Ethan, Julia May Campbell. Julia's sister-in-law and the children's aunt waved them over. May was in her early 40s, slim and sharp-eyed, her ash blonde hair cut short in a style that framed her angular jaw. She wore a red blouse and jeans, a camera slung from her neck, a notepad poking from her back pocket. Years as an investigative reporter had left May with an air of perpetual motion. She spoke quickly, walked quickly, and had a way of making even adults nervous under her gaze. Today her energy was tinged with an edge of preoccupation. "Good to see you, Jules," May said, squeezing Julia's shoulder. Her voice was warm, but her eyes flicked restlessly from face to face, always watching, always calculating. "Ethan, you ready for the big event?" she asked, grinning at her nephew. Ethan nodded, silent, but determined, clutching his jar a little tighter. May knelt beside him, lowering her voice. "You know your dad would be proud of you." The words were meant as comfort, but Ethan only looked away, cheeks coloring. May stood up, glancing at Julia. "I want to talk to you later. Something strange came up in the department's old files. It's about Mark." Julia's lips parted, but before she could respond, Ellie tugged her hand, desperate for another ride. As the hour of the auction approached, the crowd swelled in front of the temporary stage set up by the Old Town Fountain. The mayor, a stout man named Robert Holloway, whose booming laughter and bristly mustache made him a fixture at every town event, stood at the podium, gesturing for quiet. Next to him was Officer Sam Carter, a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with kind, tired eyes and a slow, steady walk. Sam's gray uniform was perfectly pressed, and his hand rested gently on Buddy's leash, as if reluctant to let go. Sam had worked alongside Mark Brooks for over a decade, and since Mark's passing, he'd looked out for Ethan in small, unspoken ways. A gentle hand on the shoulder, a quiet word of encouragement at the park. Standing nearby was Stanley Graham, the reclusive rancher whose land sprawled across the hills beyond town. He was tall and spare, his once black hair streaked with white sun-browned skin, furrowed by years outdoors. Stanley's denim jacket hung loose over a plaid shirt, heavy boots caked with red dirt. Known for his gruff voice and few words, he rarely ventured into town except for essential business. Still, he stood watching the auction, with arms folded, a silent presence that made some townsfolk glance uneasily in his direction. Rumors swirled about Stanley's temper and the accident that took his wife years ago, but today his gaze lingered thoughtfully on Buddy. At the front of the crowd, Ethan shifted from foot to foot, heart pounding as the mayor launched into a speech about the importance of service and the legacy of the town's canines. Buddy's name was called, and a hush fell as Officer Carter led the golden retriever to the stage. Sam leaned down, rubbing Buddy's head. "You'll always be a good boy, huh?" he whispered, a smile tugging at his lips. Buddy licked Sam's hand-tail, wagging softly. The mayor explained the rules. The dog would be adopted by the highest bidder, all proceeds going to the community center. Ethan hugged the jar, close peeking through the glass at the coins inside, allowance from chores, birthday money, and even a few lucky pennies his father had once given him. Julia bit her lip, hands twisting the strap of her purse. She wished she could do something, bit herself. Stop the auction, change the rules, but rules were rules, and Mark's pension had never stretched far. She searched the crowd for May, who was now scribbling furiously in her notepad, occasionally glancing at a folder of official-looking papers clutched to her side. Ethan stood as tall as he could manage, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. When bidding began, he stepped forward, voice barely above a whisper. $53.17. Some people chuckled, but others grew quiet, sensing the gravity of the moment. The auctioneer, an old farmer named Walt Jenkins, with enormous hands and a crooked smile, peered at Ethan over his glasses. "That's mighty brave, son. But do I hear 100 hands shot up around the crowd, adults with more money than they needed, some bidding, out of charity, others out of idle curiosity." The numbers climbed 102, 3. Stanley Graham raised his hand at 500, his face unreadable. In the back, a tall man in a crisp suit, Hank Davis, owner of the local security firm, entered the bidding at 700, his voice smooth and calculated. Hank was known for his expensive watch and his perfect practiced smile. He moved through town like he owned it, and many suspected he would someday. Ethan's heart hammered as the numbers rose. Buddy sat on the stage eyes scanning the crowd until they found Ethan and stayed there. At $1,000, the bidding slowed. Walt Jenkins glanced at Ethan. "Any more, son?" Ethan swallowed, shook his head, and stepped back, shoulders slumping. Julia knelt beside him, squeezing his hand. As the auction continued, May moved to Julia's side. She spoke quickly, quietly, her expression grave. "I checked Mark's old files. There are signatures missing, receipts for equipment that never arrived. It doesn't add up, Jules." Julia's hand tightened on Ethan's. "Not now, May. Please." But May pressed on her reporter's instincts, refusing to rest. "It could be why he died. I'm not done looking." Back on stage, the auction ended with Hank Davis as the highest bidder. The mayor congratulated him, but the applause was subdued. Officer Carter handed over Buddy's leash, but the dog strained back toward Ethan, whining softly. The scene left many in the crowd, uneasy whispers trailing after Hank as he led Buddy away. The retriever glancing back at Ethan until they disappeared into the throng. As the festival carried on, Ellie tugged at Ethan's sleeve, her butterfly face paint smudged by tears. Julia hugged both children close, her heart aching with helplessness. In the shade of a nearby oak, Stanley Graham watched them, expression troubled. He lingered for a moment, then quietly walked away, boots crunching over the gravel. By sundown, as the festival's laughter faded into the hum of cicadas, Ethan sat alone on the porch steps, his empty jar in his lap. Julia sat beside him silent, while May paced inside, sorting through her notes, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle she refused to let go. Somewhere in the distance, Buddy's bark echoed a sound, filled with longing, and the hope that somehow this wasn't the end. Night pressed gently over Green Valley, cooling the last shimmer of festival heat. Main Street, once alive with laughter and lights, now sat mostly empty, colored by the golden glow of old lanterns and the sleepy buzz of insects. Yet for Ethan Brooks, the world had not quieted. He sat by his bedroom window, hugging his knees, the empty mason jar on the sill beside him. Across the street, the festival banners fluttered in the breeze, but for Ethan, the world seemed to have lost its color. Downstairs, Julia moved quietly through the house, checking doors and windows with a tired care. Her posture, always a little stooped by the end of a long day at the hospital, was softer tonight, touched by a sadness she could no longer hide. She wore a loose flannel shirt, her hair escaping its bun face, bare and serious, as she rinsed cups in the sink. When she caught her own reflection in the kitchen window, her eyes looked distant, searching for a way to fix what had broken. Ellie, too young to understand the full weight of the day, was already asleep. Her arms flung wide, a worn plush bear tucked under her chin. The only sound was the occasional creak of the old house, the wind sighing through the trees, and beneath it all, Ethan's shallow, restless breathing. He missed Buddy fiercely. The auction's images replayed in his mind, Buddy's eyes uncertain and pleading. Officer Carter's hand hesitant on the leash. Hank Davis's measured, impersonal smile as he took the dog away. Ethan's heart twisted each time he remembered. It wasn't just the loss of his friend, it was the feeling that the grown-up's world was full of rules, money, and secrets he could never hope to change. Across town, Hank Davis was settling Buddy into a high-fenced backyard behind his large brick house at the edge of Green Valley. Hank, a man in his late 40s, stood over 6 feet tall, always impeccably dressed, with a physique that still suggested his years as a college athlete. His dark hair was clipped short, streaked with silver at the temples, and his angular face rarely betrayed emotion except for a tightly controlled smile. Hank's eyes, a piercing gray, were cold and assessing, missing none of the details around him. To outsiders, Hank Davis was the portrait of success, a self-made entrepreneur who ran the town's biggest security firm and sponsored nearly every major event. Yet, among those who knew him well, there were rumors of deals done in the shadows, threats made behind closed doors, and a ruthlessness that left no room for sentiment. Tonight, as he watched Buddy pace the yard, his lips curled in a frown. The dog was clearly unsettled, whining softly and glancing back toward the house. Hank muttered, "You'll adjust. Everything does sooner or later." He turned and went inside, locking the door with a deliberate click. Buddy circled the yard, tail low, his golden fur brushed by the wind. He sniffed the air, trying to orient himself in this new, strange place. The scent of cut grass mixed with chemical cleaner. There was no Ethan, no scent of Mark Brooks, only the distant, unsettling presence of Hank. Buddy finally curled up near the gate, watching the moon rise over the hills, eyes half closed, but never quite sleeping. Back at the Brooks house, May Campbell sat in her cluttered apartment, stacks of folders and notebooks spread out before her. She'd changed into sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, her short hair, tousled glasses perched on the tip of her nose. May's apartment was a chaos of papers, old press passes, photos tacked to corkboards, and a world map pricked with colored pins. Her reporter's instincts kept her awake long past midnight, piecing together the puzzle of Mark's death and Hank Davis's sudden interest in the K9 auction. May was not the type to trust coincidence. She remembered Mark's laughter, his stubborn integrity, the way he'd always looked out for his family. She also remembered his growing frustration in the last months, the whispered conversations about missing inventory at the department, and a quiet warning he'd once left on her voicemail. "If anything happens to me, follow the money. Look at Davis." The message had come just days before he died. Tonight, May's fingers flew over her laptop, cross-referencing bank records, public contracts, and a list of security equipment vendors. The pattern was subtle, but a string of payments led from the police department to a shell company registered under a name she recognized: Stanley Graham. Frowning, May scribbled a note and circled the name. Why would the town's most reclusive rancher be involved with both Mark's old department and Hank Davis? Meanwhile, Stanley Graham himself sat at his kitchen table, hunched over a chipped mug of coffee. The ranch house was silent, the only light coming from a single bulb above the stove. Stanley's hands, thick and calloused, drummed absently on the table as he stared at a newspaper article. "Hero dog retires new home," announced at festival auction. He was a man who'd lost much, his wife to illness, his son to a far-off war, and his weathered face showed it. Years of solitude had made Stanley gruff and wary, slow to trust, but tonight he felt a prickling sense of responsibility. He'd seen something in Hank Davis's eyes during the auction that unsettled him, and he remembered the look on Ethan's face, a look he'd seen in the mirror years before. Just as Stanley was about to turn in for the night, a soft knock sounded at his door. He frowned, rising with a groan. On the stoop stood Officer Sam Carter, still in uniform, the silver in his hair catching the porch light. Sam was a broad man, his presence always comforting, and his voice carried the weight of both authority and kindness. "Stanley, you got a minute?" he asked, shifting his weight. "Need to talk about Mark Brooks." Inside, the two men sat with mugs in hand. Sam explained what he'd found: a missing shipment of high-grade security cameras, receipts signed, but no equipment delivered, and an audit that had vanished from the records soon after Mark's death. Stanley listened, his deep-set eyes narrowing. "You think Hank had something to do with it?" he asked quietly. Sam nodded. "And I think Mark was getting close to proving it." Elsewhere, Ethan finally drifted into a fitful sleep, dreams full of running, he and Buddy sprinting through tall grass shadows, chasing them at every turn. In the morning, Julia found him curled on top of his blanket, one hand clutching Buddy's old collar, his face lined with determination. While Julia packed Ellie's lunch for daycare, Ethan slipped outside, determined to see Buddy again. He made his way through town, passing by the bakery where Mrs. Miller, a plump, gray-haired woman with rosy cheeks and a habit of giving away extra rolls to quiet children, waved at him from behind the counter. "You all right, honey?" she asked, but Ethan only nodded and hurried on. At the edge of town, he paused outside Hank Davis's tall wooden fence. The house beyond was imposing red brick, white trim, manicured lawn, a pair of security cameras glinting over the front door. Ethan's heart pounded as he called softly, Buddy. For a moment, there was only silence. Then faintly a whine, and Buddy's golden head appeared between the slats, tail thumping weakly. Ethan pressed his fingers through the fence, whispering comfort. Buddy licked his hand, eyes wide and anxious. Before Ethan could say more, the side door slammed and Hank Davis strode into the yard. Spotting Ethan, he paused, arms folded across his chest. "You shouldn't be here," he called, voice smooth but cold. "Go on home now. The dog's fine." Ethan backed away, heart thudding, but not before noticing the way Buddy flinched at Hank's approach. He ran home, resolve hardening in his chest. Something was wrong. Buddy didn't belong here, not with a man who made even a dog afraid. That evening, as dusk painted the valley in bruised purple and gold, May called Julia. Her voice was urgent. "Jules, I found something. I think Mark was onto a fraud scheme, and both Hank and maybe even Stanley Graham are mixed up in it. Be careful, okay? And keep an eye on Ethan." As the family gathered for dinner, Ethan stayed quiet, but for the first time since the festival, there was a spark of purpose in his eyes. He would not let Buddy go, not when so many secrets still lingered in the shadows. In another part of town, Stanley Graham looked out across his empty fields, decision weighing on him, and in her apartment, May tapped her pen against a folder marked with Mark's name, vowing not to rest until she uncovered the truth. Saturday arrived swaddled in gray, the sky swollen with the promise of rain. Early morning mist clung to the fences and pastures, and Green Valley's familiar festival banners looked faded in the pale light. For the Brooks family, the air felt even heavier. Ethan awoke to the sound of raindrops tapping the window. He lay in bed for a moment, clutching Buddy's worn collar, rehearsing the plan he'd built up all night, a plan both fragile and brave. Downstairs, Julia tried to keep the routine steady. She dressed in jeans and a neat green blouse, her hair plaited tight against the wind. Her face looked drawn, but determined, as if each movement was a conscious act of hope. Ellie, still half asleep in her purple pajamas, wandered into the kitchen, clutching her favorite blanket, her cheeks pink and eyes wide. "Can we get Buddy today?" she asked, voice trembling, with a hope only children can hold. Julia knelt, hugging her daughter tightly. "We'll try, honey," she promised, her own voice shaking. Ethan's resolve was set. He placed his jar of coins into his backpack, zipped it up, and walked quietly into the kitchen. Face pale, but eyes burning with purpose. Julia looked up from pouring coffee and smiled, seeing a flicker of Mark's quiet courage in her stepson's posture. She was about to offer him breakfast when the phone rang. It was May, her voice brisk as ever. "Jules, I need to talk to you and Ethan at the festival. Something big's going down today." Julia promised to meet her near the auction tent. Green Valley's main square was transformed by the drizzle. Neighbors huddled beneath umbrellas, children ran between puddles, and a brass band struggled through the final bars of America the Beautiful under a striped tent. At the far end, beneath a sagging white canopy, the town's annual K9 charity auction was about to begin. Buddy's old blue collar was newly shined. His fur, now drying from the earlier downpour, gleamed like fresh gold in the subdued light. Hank Davis was already there, flanked by two men in dark security uniforms. He wore a tailored gray raincoat and carried an umbrella with a silver handle, his features sharp and composed. At his side stood Gerald, a burly security supervisor with a bald head and deep-set eyes, his bulk suggesting he'd spent years moving heavy things for a living. Gerald rarely spoke, but when he did, his words landed with the weight of stone. He kept a wary eye on Buddy, as if the dog might bolt at any moment. The auction tent buzzed with tension. Stanley Graham stood near the front, hands folded over a gnarled walking stick. Today he wore a freshly pressed plaid shirt and new boots, though he looked uncomfortable in the crowd. His stern features were softer than usual, the deep lines in his face betraying both age and an empathy learned through hardship. He nodded solemnly at Ethan and Julia as they took their seats. May appeared moments later, raincoat flapping, hair damp and wild. She knelt by Ethan, her presence brisk but full of encouragement. "Don't let anyone tell you what's possible, kiddo," she whispered. "And watch Davis. He's up to something." The mayor, Robert Holloway, took the stage. His round face was flushed, and his usually booming voice sounded forced as he welcomed everyone. Today, he announced, we honor the service of Green Valley's bravest, and we give one loyal dog the chance for a loving home. He nodded toward Buddy, who sat in a kennel at the back of the stage, eyes searching the crowd for familiar faces. Bidding began with the usual formality. Hank Davis offered an initial sum that outstripped most townsfolk $500, his voice flat as if reading a grocery list. A woman named Mrs. Alvarez, a petite baker with graying curls and a ready smile, bid 100, hoping Buddy might be a good companion for her grandkids. Stanley Graham, shifting his weight with deliberate slowness, raised the bid to 600. He spoke softly, his voice carrying in the hush. Every dog deserves a home where he's loved, not just owned. Some in the crowd murmured approval. Others rolled their eyes, thinking of Stanley's reputation for stubbornness. As the numbers climbed, Ethan's hands trembled. He stood on tiptoe, squeezed past two teenagers, and announced $53.17. His voice wavered, but the entire tent fell silent. For a long moment, only the rain tapping on the canvas could be heard. A few people snickered. Someone called, "That won't even pay for his food." Gerald, the security supervisor, chuckled deeply, but May shot him a sharp glare. Hank's lips twitched into a smirk, but his eyes were cold and unreadable. Ethan didn't back down. He held out the jar coins, rattling as he shook with nerves. "It's all I have. I saved it for Buddy." His words quiet, but fierce, cut through the laughter. Julia reached over, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's enough," she said, her own voice ringing with certainty. Stanley Graham straightened, nodding at Ethan. "I second the boy's bid. Sometimes love is worth more than dollars." The mayor hesitated, unsure how to proceed, glancing between the boy, the rancher, and the intimidating figure of Hank Davis. Hank raised his umbrella, speaking with bored authority. "Rules are rules, Mr. Mayor. High bid takes the dog. This isn't charity." Before anyone could respond, a sudden commotion broke the tense air. Buddy, sensing Ethan's voice, began to bark, a sharp, insistent sound that grew in intensity. Gerald moved to steady the kennel, but Buddy braced his paws, teeth flashing for a heartbeat, and with a surge of strength popped the latch. The golden retriever barreled through the opening, scattering sawdust and sending Gerald stumbling backward. The tent erupted. Children squealed, adults shouted, and umbrellas toppled as Buddy sprinted across the stage, ignoring Hank's sharp whistle and Gerald's outstretched hands. He ran straight for Ethan, tail flying, paws skidding on the wet grass. Ethan dropped to his knees just as Buddy flung himself into his arms, knocking the jar to the ground. Coins scattered across the floor, but Ethan barely noticed, burying his face in Buddy's fur, his laughter dissolving into tears of relief and joy. A hush fell. Strangers, friends, even the mayor, frozen by the scene. Julia knelt beside Ethan and Buddy, wrapping them both in a trembling embrace. For a moment, the rain, the rules, the money, all faded away. Stanley Graham stepped forward, tapping his cane on the ground. "I think the dog's made his choice," he said, voice steady. "And I stand with the boy." He fixed Hank with a look both steely and sad. "Some things can't be bought, Davis. Not here." May snapped photos, blinking back tears, her reporter's heart swelling with pride. The mayor, visibly moved, cleared his throat. "Well, seems we have ourselves a new family." He turned to the crowd, voice breaking. "Let's give them a hand." Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then swelling into a warm tide that filled the tent. Gerald scowled, muttering under his breath, but Hank stood perfectly still, face a mask of disappointment and calculation. As the rain eased and the sun broke through the clouds, Ethan and Buddy walked from the stage together, trailed by Julia May and little Ellie waving excitedly. Stanley Graham lingered at the edge of the crowd, meeting Ethan's eyes with a gentle nod before quietly making his way home. Even the most skeptical townsfolk felt the tug of something true and rare, a moment when love, not money, won the day. The first real sunlight in days splashed over Green Valley, painting everything with the fresh gleam of a world washed clean. The Brooks family's house seemed to breathe easier, windows flung wide to welcome the breeze. On this rare, calm morning, Ethan felt lighter than he had since the spring. Though the memory of the tense auction lingered, Buddy was sprawled happily at his feet, tail thumping each time Ethan's hand reached down to scratch his ears. After breakfast, Julia packed Ellie's bag for a playdate, with a neighbor giving Ethan a rare afternoon alone with Buddy. Julia herself looked more relaxed today, her long hair loose for once, laughter returning in brief surprise bursts as she listened to Ellie's endless chatter. When she left, she squeezed Ethan's shoulder gently, her eyes shining with trust and gratitude for her stepson's stubborn loyalty. With the house quiet, Ethan wandered to the back porch, Buddy trailing at his heels. The old golden retriever seemed almost puppy-like today, nose sniffing the grass, every movement infused with energy. Suddenly, Buddy paused, head cocked, and trotted toward the corner of the garden, where a tangled patch of wild mint and clover grew. There, he began to dig furiously, paws flinging earth in all directions. Ethan hurried over, heart racing with curiosity. Within moments, Buddy uncovered a battered metal object, a small circular medal strung on a blue ribbon, its surface dulled by age and dirt. Ethan's breath caught. He recognized the shape instantly. This was one of the medals his father, Officer Mark Brooks, had always worn on his dress uniform, a symbol of bravery awarded after a particularly dangerous rescue years ago. He knelt, cradling the medal in his palm. As he brushed the dirt away, he noticed that the back seemed thicker than normal. Carefully, Ethan twisted the rim, feeling it give under his fingers. The medal popped open, revealing a tightly folded scrap of paper hidden inside. His hands shook as he spread the fragile note across his knee. The writing was hurried and cramped, a series of numbers and letters arranged in uneven lines. At first it looked like nonsense, random codes, some circled, some underlined. At the bottom, in Mark's bold, familiar script, were 3 words, "Trust Buddy May." Ethan stared at the message, mind racing. Had his father left this for him, or for someone else? He knew only one person who might understand what it meant. Without waiting, Ethan raced inside to find the cordless phone. He dialed May's number with clumsy urgency. May Campbell was hunched over a cluttered desk in her apartment when the call came. Her hair, once neat, now stuck out in wild directions, and her fingers were stained with ink from hours of note-taking. The wall behind her was covered with maps, photos, and pinned scraps of receipts. Today she wore a battered leather jacket and hiking boots, a look that gave her the air of a stubborn detective. She answered on the third ring, voice brisk but gentle. "Ethan, you okay?" "I found something," Ethan said breathlessly. "It's Dad's medal. There's a note inside, with codes, and it says to trust Buddy and you." May's tone sharpened with focus. "Bring it to the station. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. As she hung up, she grabbed her camera notebook and a small flashlight, force of habit, as if expecting trouble in every shadow. The police station stood at the center of town, an unassuming brick building with faded flags and cracked steps. May was waiting outside when Ethan arrived with Buddy, her posture alert. "Let's go somewhere quiet," she murmured, leading him to a side room stacked with old case files. May inspected the note with quick, practiced eyes. "This looks like a substitution cipher. Old school police code." Mark used to joke he could write anything in code, even a grocery list. Buddy lay at Ethan's feet, tail sweeping slowly, eyes tracking every movement. May got to work pulling out a battered codebook she kept for investigative stories. As she and Ethan pieced together the numbers and letters, a message began to emerge. Hidden between the lines were references to equipment, invoices, missing shipments, and a meeting spot on Graham Hill, a bluff just outside Stanley Graham's ranch. May's face grew tense as she translated more. Mark found proof that someone in the department was pocketing money and faking deliveries. He planned to meet someone at Graham Hill for evidence. At that moment, her phone buzzed a text from an anonymous number. "You're getting too close. Stop digging or you'll regret it." May's jaw tightened. She showed Ethan, trying to stay calm. "We don't scare easy, do we?" Determined to follow the trail, May and Ethan headed for the ranch. Buddy trotted alongside, alert to every sound, as if he too understood the day's gravity. Graham Hill loomed above the valley, a place of wild grass and wind-stunted trees. Stanley Graham was working near the old cattle pens when they arrived. He wore a faded work shirt, his boots caked in mud, broad-shouldered and imposing, but with a kindness that creased his face whenever he smiled. His dog, a wiry old blue heeler named Patch, eyed Buddy with cautious interest, but wagged his tail in greeting. Stanley listened as Ethan and May explained what they'd found. His expression darkened. "Mark asked to meet me up here a few days before he died," Stanley admitted, voice gravelly. "Said he was onto something big, something to do with Hank Davis and some missing gear. But he never made it. Next thing I knew, he was gone." He led them to a weathered shed at the edge of the property. "He left this with me." From a hidden compartment behind a loose board, Stanley retrieved a folder. Inside were copies of fake invoices and photos of unfamiliar men loading crates into a dark van. One photo showed the license plate registered to a shell company owned by Hank Davis. May snapped pictures, her heart pounding. "This is enough to blow the story wide open," she whispered. "But it's dangerous. We need more proof, something they can't destroy or deny." She looked at Buddy, then at Ethan. "Your dad trusted you and Buddy with this for a reason." Before they could decide their next move, a white pickup rumbled down the road, dust rising behind it. A new face stepped out, a young deputy barely 20, slim and nervous with sandy hair and pale skin, freckled by the sun. His badge was askew on his uniform, and his voice quivered as he spoke. "Miss Campbell, you should leave. Hank Davis knows you're here. He's coming." The deputy's name tag read, Curtis. Stanley nodded grimly. "Thank you, Curtis. You did the right thing." The deputy lingered, glancing fearfully back toward town, then hurried off. May, Stanley, Ethan, and Buddy gathered the files medal and photos, heading back through the fields with urgency. The sky was darkening once more, thunder rumbling over the mountains. At home, Julia welcomed them, anxiously gathering Ethan and Buddy into a fierce embrace. That night, as rain hammered the roof, May sifted through the evidence, piecing together timelines matching faces to names, making plans to publish the truth. Meanwhile, Buddy curled up at the foot of Ethan's bed, the old medal and the coded note resting beside them, a reminder that love, loyalty, and courage sometimes leave clues in the unlikeliest of places. A storm brewed over Green Valley that evening, swirling clouds cloaking the moon and making the forests on the edge of town appear even more mysterious, their shadows bending in the restless wind. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Julia hurried to secure the windows, her hair clinging damply to her cheekbones, her movements quick and tense. The air inside the Brooks house was charged, every adult sensing the gathering threat, even as they tried to hide their worry from the children. After dinner, Julia busied herself with laundry, trying to distract Ellie and Ethan with board games and stories, but both children were too restless to focus. Buddy padded from room to room, gaze fixed on Ethan, as if waiting for a command only the boy could give. The old retriever had taken to lying in the hallway at night, body sprawled protectively near the children's bedrooms. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, fingers tracing the rim of his father's medal, the coded note still folded carefully in his pocket. Julia noticed his faraway look and set a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's all right to be scared," she whispered, voice quivering with unspoken fears. "We're together. That's what matters." Ethan nodded, grateful, but unable to shake the dread coiling in his chest. The house phone rang shrill and insistent. Julia answered, and a familiar voice May's came through, clipped with urgency. "Jules, I've got the last pieces, invoices, emails, photos enough to bring the truth to light. But you have to be careful. Hank knows we're close. Watch the kids tonight and don't let Buddy out of your sight." Julia thanked her and hung up, eyes troubled. Not long after headlights swept across the front windows, Ethan's heart skipped as a black SUV rolled to a stop by the curb. Hank Davis stepped out into the rain suit, impeccable even in the storm, his silver-streaked hair slicked back. He moved with a predatory calm, his umbrella snapping open like a challenge. Beside him was Gerald, the security supervisor, and another man, tall, bony, with close-cropped reddish hair and a twitchy, restless gaze. This was Ray Brewer, one of Hank's most trusted men, known for his sharp tongue and short temper. Ray's thin frame was made wiry by years of work and worry. His lips never quite relaxed from a sneer. Julia, gathering the children, tensed as Hank knocked. He was all cold civility. "Evening. Julia, sorry for the intrusion. Mind if we talk inside?" His tone made it clear it wasn't a request. Julia met his gaze, steeling herself. "You can say whatever you need from the porch." Rain streaked down the glass between them. Hank smiled tightly. "Let's not make this difficult. I know you have something that belongs to me. The dog and certain files. Hand them over, and this can all go away." Gerald loomed at his side, arms crossed, while Ray stared at Ethan and Ellie with a cold, appraising glance. Ethan felt his fists ball up, but Julia stood tall. "Buddy's our family, and we're not giving you anything." Hank's smile faded. "This isn't a request, Julia. If you don't want things to get complicated, I suggest you reconsider." At that moment, Ellie, curious and unafraid, had slipped away from the living room. The adults' argument was background noise to her. She was more interested in the flickering shadows outside. Slipping into her raincoat and rubber boots, she pushed open the back door, Buddy trailing behind her. "Come on, Buddy, let's find some frogs," she whispered, her tiny form vanishing into the storm-damp yard. The wind rattled the trees as she made her way to the edge of the woods, following what she thought was the sound of croaking, but was in truth a distant mocking whistle. Ray, ever watchful, noticed the movement. He nudged Gerald and slipped away around the side of the house, his silhouette melting into the night. In the commotion, Ethan glanced at the hallway and realized Ellie was missing. Panic surged. "Ellie's gone!" he shouted. Julia bolted for the back door, calling desperately. Thunder crashed. Buddy's barking echoed from deep in the trees, a frantic, urgent sound. Ellie's voice floated back, scared and small. "Buddy, wait for me." But Buddy stayed close to her, his broad body bristling as he scented Ray's approach. When Ray tried to grab Ellie's arm, Buddy lunged, teeth bared, growling so fiercely that Ray recoiled, slipping in the mud. Inside, Ethan grabbed his raincoat and flashlight. "I'm going after her." Julia tried to stop him, but Stanley Graham arrived just then, splashing up the driveway in his old truck. He jumped out, boots squelching in the mud, his lined face grim and determined. "Sam Carter's right behind me," he called. "Let's find your sister." Stanley, tall and broad, radiated a calm authority that reassured Ethan. He handed the boy an extra flashlight. "You stay close to me." "Here." Moments later, Officer Sam Carter arrived, his police cruiser's lights flashing red and blue through the sheets of rain. Sam's still solidly built hair plastered to his brow spoke quickly but gently. "I'll search the north side. Stanley, you and Ethan check the old creek trail." He handed Julia his phone. "If you hear anything, call." Together, Ethan and Stanley plunged into the woods, mud sucking at their boots. Stanley's breath steamed in the cold air, and though he moved quickly, he checked over his shoulder for Ethan every few steps. "We'll find her son." He said, his gruff voice gentler than usual. The trees closed around them, rain drumming a frantic rhythm on the leaves. They found small footprints leading toward the old footbridge. The light from Ethan's flashlight bounced wildly, but Buddy's barking was their true guide. Finally, through the undergrowth, they glimpsed Ellie crouched beside a log, crying Buddy standing between her and Ray Brewer, who was nursing a bleeding wrist from Buddy's bite. Stanley moved fast, his voice thunderous. "Get away from her!" Ray hesitated, weighing his chances, but the sight of Sam's approaching flashlight and the growl from Buddy sent him fleeing through the brush. Ethan rushed to Ellie, hugging her tight. Buddy circled them both, licking their faces, tail wagging with relief. Stanley checked them over, then radioed Sam. "We found them. All safe." In the darkness, the four boy, girl, rancher, and dog made their way home, Buddy ever watchful at their side. Back at the house, Julia wept as she hugged Ellie, whispering thanks to Stanley and Sam. Hank and Gerald, seeing the rescue from the porch, melted away into the storm, their threats postponed but not forgotten. Officer Carter promised to file a report on Ray's attempted abduction, but warned Julia to stay alert. Meanwhile, in a quiet motel room on the far edge of town, May Campbell was hunched over her laptop, illuminated only by the screen's blue glow. Piles of files and photos surrounded her. She was thinner now, face sharpened by sleepless nights, hair pulled into a tight bun. Her tenacity bordered on obsession, but tonight it was paying off. She finished compiling the last of the evidence wire transfers, falsified invoices, emails implicating Hank Davis in the embezzlement that led to Mark Brooks's murder. She sent the files to 3 different news outlets, and the state police heart pounding as she hit send. When Ethan and Ellie were finally tucked into bed, Buddy sprawled between them, one paw on each child, as if to say, "I will never let you go again." Outside, rain lashed the windows, but inside, love and resolve glowed brighter than any storm. Morning in Green Valley broke bright and sharp, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The storm had passed, leaving the streets scrubbed clean, dew shining on every blade of grass. Townsfolk bustled about in unusual anticipation, whispering over fences and shop counters about the extraordinary meeting called at the council hall. Even the sky seemed bluer, stretched wide with hope and suspense. Inside the Brooks home, the air vibrated with nervous energy. Julie addressed Ethan in a clean-collared shirt, smoothing his hair with a trembling hand. Her own appearance was uncharacteristically formal, navy skirt, crisp blouse pearls at her throat. The circles beneath her eyes betrayed sleepless nights, but her gaze was steady, full of maternal pride and fierce protection. Ellie, tiny in her flowered dress, clung to Julia's side, wide-eyed and solemn. Buddy, freshly brushed and wearing Mark's old service bandana, paced restlessly occasionally, pressing his nose into Ethan's palm for reassurance. May Campbell arrived early, clutching her laptop, a battered camera bag, and a thick folder stuffed with evidence. She wore a dark blazer over jeans, her jaw set in determination, hair pinned back to keep her sharp eyes unobstructed. The past days had left her leaner, more intense, but the old warmth in her smile surfaced whenever she looked at Ethan or Julia. Stanley Graham pulled up in his dusty truck, dressed in his best pressed shirt and faded black jeans. He walked with his usual stoic heaviness, but offered Ethan a reassuring wink as he joined the family. Officer Sam Carter, broad and fatherly in his perfectly pressed police uniform, stopped by to escort them, his presence both protective and symbolic, a silent message to the town that justice still mattered. The council hall was crowded long before the meeting started. The room, usually filled with bored officials and half-hearted citizens, now buzzed with tension. At the front sat the 5 council members, led by Mayor Robert Holloway, his big frame squeezed into a worn suit mustache, bristling with discomfort. Next to him was Councilwoman Margaret Evans, a petite silver-haired woman with sharp glasses and a reputation for honesty. She greeted Julia and May with a nod of encouragement. 2 younger councilmen, Anthony Reed and Michael Lopez, one tall and sandy-haired, the other short and wiry, looked uneasy, whispering nervously. The last was Councilman Scott Price, a heavy-set man with slicked-back hair and an air of self-importance who darted anxious glances at the press assembled near the back. The townspeople filled every seat and lined the walls, faces a mixture of hope, suspicion, and curiosity. Hank Davis sat at the end of the front row, immaculate as always, his posture rigid, gray eyes flat and expressionless. Gerald, his hulking security chief, stood by the door with arms folded. Ray Brewer, his wrist still bandaged from Buddy's bite, glared at the Brooks family, but avoided Buddy's unwavering stare. When the mayor called the meeting to order, silence fell. Julia rose, voice clear, but trembling as she spoke. "We are here not just for ourselves, but for Mark Brooks, my husband Ethan and Ellie's father. He gave his life trying to protect this town, and now we must honor his memory by seeking the truth." The crowd listened rapt. Ethan stood at her side, clutching Buddy's leash. May followed, opening her folder and setting her laptop on the lectern. May presented the evidence, fake invoices, emails, photos, and the coded note hidden in Mark's metal. She displayed images of crates marked as police equipment being loaded into Hank Davis's security trucks, and cross-referenced wire transfers showing money siphoned from the town's accounts. Her voice was steady, but her words sliced through the air with the weight of months of investigation. Stanley Graham spoke next, voice gravelly but resonant. "Mark came to me for help because he saw something rotten in our town. He trusted Buddy, and he trusted us. It's time the council listened." Sam Carter stepped forward, producing official police records confirming Mark's investigation and confirming the truthfulness of the evidence. As each piece was laid bare, murmurs grew among the townsfolk. The council members examined the evidence in stunned silence. Margaret Evans's face tightened with anger, while Reed and Lopez shifted uncomfortably, whispering between themselves. Hank Davis's composure finally cracked. He stood abruptly, voice sharp. "This is a smear campaign. I demand to speak." His voice rose, but the mayor silenced him with a firm bang of the gavel. "You'll have your say, Mr. Davis." Hank ranted about loyalty tradition, his service to the town. He dismissed the evidence as circumstantial, accused May of bias, and tried to sway the council with promises of more generous contributions. But the room had turned. Even those once on his side recoiled from his icy tone and Gerald's looming presence. May finished with her trump card testimony from Deputy Curtis, the young nervous officer who had witnessed the forged paperwork, and who now, standing pale but resolute before the crowd, confessed what he knew. "Mr. Davis threatened us. He made it clear that speaking up would cost our jobs or worse. But I can't stay quiet anymore." His courage drew a round of applause and left the council with no doubt. Finally, Julia requested the council vote on 2 matters: Hank Davis's removal and prosecution, and the formal designation of Buddy as Ethan's therapy dog and key witness. Margaret Evans read aloud the clause in town law that permitted retired service animals to be adopted by minors in cases of therapy or hardship. Mayor Holloway called for a vote. Hands rose around the table one after another. Reed and Lopez exchanged glances, then nodded. Price hesitated, but seeing the sea of faces watching, reluctantly voted yes. The mayor declared the motions passed. Applause filled the room. Ethan knelt hugging Buddy tightly as the golden retriever nuzzled his cheek tail, wagging with joy. Julia and Ellie crowded close, both in tears. May's shoulders finally relaxed. Stanley placed a comforting hand on Ethan's back, pride shining in his weathered eyes. Even Officer Carter blinked rapidly, his stern face softening as he watched the family embrace. Hank Davis was led from the room, in handcuffs. Gerald scowling after him, Ray shrinking back into the crowd. Councilwoman Evans assured Ethan and Julia that the town would protect them, and Buddy's service and sacrifice would be honored. As the hall emptied, neighbors lined up to offer hugs, handshakes, and words of admiration. Buddy accepted pats and treats with gentle dignity, his status as hero and healer now secured, not by law alone, but by the shared faith of a grateful town. Summer faded into a soft golden autumn, and Green Valley bloomed with the slow, quiet joy that only comes after a storm. The Brooks house, once shadowed by worry and grief, filled now with the music of laughter, the patter of quick feet, and the ever-present thump of Buddy's tail against the floor. The town itself seemed to stand a little taller, windows glinting brighter, neighbors greeting each other with newfound warmth, children running wild beneath the oaks that edged Main Street. On a crisp Saturday morning, sunlight slanted through the kitchen, painting Julia's hair gold as she whisked pancake batter, humming a tune she had not sung in years. Her face, so often drawn by fear and fatigue, was bright with purpose and peace. The lines around her eyes had softened, and her laughter rose easily, echoing down the hallway and out the open windows. Julia had always carried grace, but now for the first time in a long while, she looked unburdened, a woman who'd found her way back to hope. Ethan and Ellie tumbled into the kitchen, still tangled in sleep pajamas askew. Ethan's dark hair flopped over his forehead. His eyes, once so guarded, sparkled with anticipation. There was a subtle but unmistakable change in his bearing. He moved with the confidence of a boy no longer defined by loss. His voice no longer a whisper, but clear and warm as he traded gentle jokes with his sister. Ellie, cheeks apple red, skipped around Buddy, who wagged his tail with the calm devotion of an old friend. The golden retriever was every inch the family guardian coat, glossy gait, easy eyes always tracking the children with patient affection. Even in stillness, Buddy radiated reassurance. He had filled out since coming home, a testament to regular meals, long walks, and the constancy of gentle hands. Breakfast became a cheerful chaos of syrup and giggles. Julia paused a moment, watching Ethan tip extra blueberries into Ellie's plate, and her eyes shone with a gratitude that needed no words. The house, once echoing with absence, now thrummed with belonging. Later that morning, Ethan shouldered his backpack, a battered thing patched at the seams and covered with school club pins. For the first time in nearly a year, he was eager to head to soccer practice, his stride easy and shoulders loose. When Julia handed him a lunch bag, he grinned and slipped his arm around her waist. "Thanks, Mom," he said, the word natural, now unforced. Julia blinked hard, heart full. Ellie watched from the doorway, holding Buddy's leash, the pair of them ready for their own adventure in the park. At school, Ethan found his old friend Ben waiting by the gate. Ben, a wiry boy with a dusting of freckles and an endless supply of jokes, had always been the first to offer a hand or a dare. "You coming to the big party tonight?" Ben asked, slapping Ethan on the back. Ethan nodded, a quick smile blooming. "Wouldn't miss it." Other classmates gathered around, and this time Ethan didn't hesitate. He told them about Buddy's rescue, about the night in the woods, about his dad's medal and May's investigation. His voice was steady, and though tears threatened once or twice, he did not shrink from the story. In their eyes he saw not pity, but admiration, and for the first time, Ethan felt himself part of something larger. His place in the current of schoolyard life restored. Meanwhile, Julia spent the afternoon in the town square, helping set up for the community celebration. Mrs. Alvarez from the bakery, short, round, and always in motion, bustled by with trays of cookies, her silver curls bouncing. "We owe that dog and your boy so much, Julia," she said, her smile luminous. Julia squeezed the baker's hand, the simple gesture laden with the weight of shared trials and victories. May Campbell arrived next, camera around her neck, hair windblown, but her face shining with pride. She wore a crisp new jacket pinned with a town medal and moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who had nothing left to hide. Everywhere she turned, neighbors thanked her, pressing her hand, some whispering their own stories of courage quietly found. May's smile was softer now. The world seemed safer and wider, and her eyes no longer darted to shadows. Stanley Graham appeared hat in hand, his broad shoulders draped in a clean plaid shirt. He stood taller than most, but his smile, wry, shy, deeply sincere, belied the hardness he'd worn for years. Children clustered at his knees, listening to tales of ranching and dogs. Stanley's faith in the community had been rekindled, and in every handshake, every shared laugh, he found a small piece of the healing he had long denied himself. When sunset painted the town in honey and rose families gathered beneath strings of lights hung across the square, the mayor, still round and red-cheeked, raised his voice above the buzz. Tonight, we celebrate not only justice served, but a family restored, a town that stood together. And to our heroes, both two-legged and four, thank you. Applause rippled like wind in the grass. Ethan and Ellie ran through the crowd. Buddy close behind his leash, trailing but unnecessary. He never strayed far. Julia and May joined them, arms-linked faces glowing. Stanley stood beside them, sharing the spotlight with gentle humility. Officer Sam Carter, crisp in dress uniform, led the crowd in a cheer, his baritone ringing. Here's to courage, to truth, and to never giving up on each other. Tables overflowed with Pie's lemonade and the best food the valley could offer. As music started, a sweet old tune played by local fiddlers. Neighbors danced beneath the wide evening sky. Ben pulled Ethan into a wild circle of kids, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan let himself be carried by laughter and friendship. As twilight deepened, the mayor stepped forward with a special honor. To May Campbell, whose stubborn courage brought us justice. To Stanley Graham, whose faith steadied us. And to Buddy, who taught us that love's truest gift is loyalty. Each received a medal shining in the lantern light. At the party's end, as families drifted home, Ethan, Ellie, Julia, and Buddy lingered a moment on the green. Overhead, a rainbow arched across the clearing sky, its colors dazzling impossibly bright. Ethan pointed, Ellie squealed, Buddy barked as if to claim it. Julia drew her children close, heart overflowing. It's a promise she whispered for new beginnings. Buddy leaned into Ethan golden head, pressing against the boy's heart, and in that quiet, unguarded moment, all the wounds, old and new, felt as though they might finally heal. In the heart of Green Valley, beneath a sky swept clean, a family became whole once more, and hope at last was home. Sometimes the true miracles in life are the moments of love, faith, and loyalty that guide us through hardship. Like Ethan's journey, God's grace often appears in the most unexpected ways, giving us hope and strength to begin again. If this story touched you, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. May God bless everyone watching and bring peace to your families. If you believe in everyday miracles, comment Amen to join us in faith.